Hey guys, tonight we are heading straight into the streets of Tang Dynasty, China, where the night never really belonged to sleep. Picture this. You stroll past rows of tall wooden frames holding silk lanterns painted with dragons, flowers and riddles, their flames wobbling in the breeze like nervous contestants on a cooking show. The air smells faintly of beeswax and roasted chestnuts. Somewhere, a flute plays faintly in the distance, and a cluster of kids laugh as they try to solve a lantern riddle that even Google today would shrug at. It's magical, it's chaotic, and yes, you probably won't survive this if you trip over the wrong fire-breathing street performer. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from and what's the local time right now? Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You wander beneath archways glowing like giant fireflies. Lantern festivals in the Tang era aren't just an excuse to light stuff on fire. They re-social networking, Tinder, and Netflix rolled into one. Everyone comes out, from the lowest street vendor to members of the court disguised in casual robes. Bright lotus-shaped lanterns float on rivers, while towers of stacked lamps rise so high they look like glowing Jenga sets threatening collapse. One official report mentions wooden lamp towers stretching over 100 feet tall, which makes you wonder, were Tang engineers fearless or just deeply overconfident? Shadow plays is the other star of the night. You follow a crowd into a small courtyard where a white screen glows from oil lamps placed behind it. Flat leather puppets, colored with mineral pigments, dance across the light, their limbs jointed with string. The puppeteer's voice wavers dramatically, telling tales of generals and wandering monks, while a flute and drum punctuate every leap and slash. It's basically Netflix binge-watching, except the episode count is infinite and the skip intro button is your bladder telling you it's time to leave. Mainstream historians agree that lantern festivals peaked in Chang'an, the Tang capital, during the reign of Emperor Xuanzong. Streets were cleared, curfews lifted, and even commoners could stay out till dawn without the usual "hey, why are you loitering?" guard routine. But here's the quirky twist. Some records suggest lanterns weren't just for beauty, they might have carried secret political symbols. A painted carp, for example, could signal loyalty to a certain faction. Historians still argue whether these claims are exaggerated, but it does add a spicy layer of espionage to what otherwise looks like harmless glowing fish art. You pause at a riddle lantern, where the game is simple. Solve the word puzzle written in calligraphy. If you're right, you win a prize, usually a trinket or sweet. If you're wrong, well, you just lose face literally. People laugh at you until your ears burn. The puzzles are maddening. Imagine a crossword clue written by a poet after 5 cups of plum wine. One Tang anecdote mentions a riddle about a thing that comes without shadow and leaves no trace, the answer being a dream, which, let's be honest, feels very on brand for a culture that loved mixing philosophy with party games. As you stroll further, you notice performers scattered everywhere, jugglers tossing flaming clubs, magicians making coins vanish and probably reappear in your pocket later, only lighter by a few copper pieces. Kids chase shadow puppets with their own hands, forming rabbits and dogs on the walls. One dad insists his hand shadow dragon is terrifying, but honestly it looks more like a confused goose. The sensory overload is dazzling. Lanterns drip wax onto the pavement, crackling slightly as oil hisses from wicks. Spices drift from food stalls, cinnamon, cumin, and ginger, blending with the smoky tang of grilled lamb skewers. The noise is relentless. Gongs, flutes, laughter, shouts, the occasional donkey braying like it's auditioning for the main act. And through it all, you can't help but feel the pulse of a city where night is not a quiet pause but another stage for display. There's also a practical side. Lanterns, by sheer accident, make the city safer at night. Before this craze, streets went dark after sunset, and good luck finding your way home without a candle stub or a very patient friend. During festivals, though, it's as if the entire city becomes a giant, flickering chandelier. Suddenly, people can walk freely, meet strangers, and pretend they're not terrified of stepping into a drainage ditch. One curious fringe note. Some nobles hired servants to carry miniature lanterns shaped like animals to announce their arrival at parties. Imagine walking into a room preceded by a glowing silk turtle. That's not just an entrance, that's a lifestyle. You slip down a side street where couples huddle beneath lantern arches, whispering. The festival has always had a romantic edge. The mingling crowds give young people excuses to meet outside family surveillance. Some scholars even joke that lantern festivals doubled as marriage markets. And let's be real, nothing says, "I want to spend my life with you," like squinting at a paper riddle together and both failing spectacularly. The night lingers, and though your feet ache, curiosity keeps tugging you along. Each lantern feels like a breadcrumb leading you deeper into a city alive with secrets, laughter, and whispers. Shadow puppets continue their endless stories, and you realize strangely that these glowing nights carry the same restless energy you feel scrolling at 2 a.m., except, instead of blue light from your phone, it's warm candle flame painting the Tang Dynasty sky. The echoes of exotic music trail behind you like invisible silk ribbons as you wander into a street ablaze with colors far brighter than the lanterns you saw earlier. Here, Tang citizens parade their personal style like it's a competition, and you quickly realize that fashion in this era was just as performative, and occasionally just as ridiculous as polo or puppet shows. Silk flows, sleeves trail like banners, and hairstyles defy gravity, physics, and common sense. Women wear towering coiffures that seem to scrape the sky. Some are adorned with pins, combs, and even miniature figurines balanced carefully atop their heads. Men, not to be outdone, sport bright robes, intricate belts, and hats that resemble tiny pagodas. Mainstream historical fact: Tang Dynasty fashion was famously extravagant. Court ladies favored high collars, layered silks, and hairstyles that could take hours and multiple attendants to perfect. Hairpins were as much jewelry as functional tools, and every color choice signaled status and taste. The quirky twist: some hairstyles were intentionally absurd. One popular style mimicked a phoenix, complete with painted eyes and feathered wings. Imagine walking down the street and nearly mistaking a lady's hair for a living bird perched on her head. Historians still argue whether these elaborate coiffures were daily wear or reserved for festivals and special occasions. But the surviving murals make it clear. People didn't shy away from extremes. You move down the boulevard, dodging the occasional dangling silk sleeve. A noblewoman glides past, her robe catching the lantern light, leaving a faint scent of jasmine and camphor. Children gawk, men bow politely, and the smell of perfumed powders mingles with roasted chestnuts. Some onlookers discreetly note which fabrics are imported from Persia or Central Asia, because clearly, even fashion is competitive. Eyebrows are another spectacle. Both men and women experimented boldly, plucked, painted, or extended with thin brushes. One gentleman appears to be wearing a single eyebrow that stretches across his forehead like a bridge. You blink. The crowd blinks politely. Tang beauty standards could be ambitious. Accessories are everywhere. Jade pendants, gold earrings, and silk sashes flutter like pennants. One child attempts to mimic a noble's ornate shoes, which have elevated solace, making every step sound like a miniature drum roll. Humor and style collide as the audience reacts with polite amusement or admiration. Fringe historians note that some of these fashion parades doubled as social commentary, subtly poking fun at extravagance or flaunting wealth to attract marriage prospects. In a small plaza, a fashion contest unfolds. Participants strut along a makeshift stage, demonstrating their most daring combinations of robes, hats, and jewelry. Judges, often older women or fashion-conscious officials, nod, occasionally frowning at audacious combinations that break tradition. You realize it's a form of entertainment, like a runway show with more personality and fewer rules about being humble. And yes, there's risk. Tang fashion could be physically taxing: towering hair, layered robes, heavy jewelry. One woman teeters slightly, caught by a servant before disaster strikes. You can't help but chuckle. This is elegance bordering on acrobatics. The crowd isn't entirely passive. You notice whispered bets: which hairstyle will survive the night? Or who has the heaviest embroidered belt? Participation is subtle but lively, a social game hidden beneath layers of silk. Historians still argue whether these parades were genuinely competitive or more theatrical displays meant to impress and amuse. You spot a playful trend: embroidered animals sewn into the hems of robes. Peacocks, dragons, tigers, sometimes all three stitched together in improbable harmony. Someone points out a rabbit embroidered upside down. The crowd chuckles. Tang humor seems to have a hand in fashion too. As you meander, you can't help but notice the confidence of everyone around you. Fashion isn't just about looks, it's a statement, a declaration, a conversation without words. Every hairstyle, every silk sash, every painted eyebrow contributes to an identity as visible and performative as the lanterns of festival night or the dancers in moonlit gardens. By the time you drift toward a quieter street, your eyes have feasted on more color and creativity than they could have imagined. The Tang Dynasty didn't just dress to impress, they dressed to astonish, delight, and occasionally confuse. And somehow, you're grateful your own wardrobe doesn't require a stepladder to manage. The streets of silk and towering hairstyles fade behind you as the night air grows cooler, carrying a different kind of scent, incense, earth, and the faint tang of ink from scribes' brushes. You find yourself approaching a dimly lit courtyard, where the clatter of dice and clinking cups is replaced by the whisper of brush against paper. Calligraphy, Tang China's most revered art form, is on display, and tonight you're about to witness both precision and whimsy. A scholar sits cross-legged, brush poised over a sheet of fine paper. Ink pools on the page like midnight puddles, then spreads into sharp, deliberate strokes. Mainstream historical fact: Tang calligraphy was a pinnacle of Chinese artistry. Officials, poets, and even emperors practiced it, believing that the quality of one's writing reflected moral character and intellect. A single misjudged stroke could be a social faux pas, worse, a career-limiting offense. Here's the quirky tidbit: some Tang calligraphers created ghost strokes, lines intentionally made to appear shaky or uneven, as if a spirit guided the brush. Patrons believed these strokes carried mystical significance or captured the artist's inner mood. You watch, fascinated, as a poet deliberately wiggles a line and declares it inspired by the fluttering of a crane's heartbeat. Historians still argue whether ghost strokes were widely respected techniques or private eccentricities, but either way, they add personality to the precision. The courtyard smells faintly of wet clay and incense. Servants shuffle quietly, carrying trays of tea and small snacks, while musicians provide soft background notes from a guqin. You feel almost voyeuristic, as though you've stumbled into a sacred space. Yet everyone seems welcoming, proud to share their art with an appreciative audience. A young woman, perhaps a student or apprentice, demonstrates speed calligraphy. Her brush moves in a torrent of elegant arcs, each character flowing seamlessly into the next. Onlookers murmur approval, even seasoned scholars nod. The brush dances over the paper like a lively snake, tracing poetry that seems to leap off the page. But it's not all solemnity. Across the courtyard, a prankster dips his brush into tea instead of ink, producing faint, amusingly pale characters. The crowd suppresses giggles. The prankster bows theatrically, and a friend retaliates with a feather, tickling him mid-stroke. Tang calligraphy gatherings weren't just about skill, they were social theaters, where humor and rivalry mingled with artistry. Some calligraphers experiment with unusual surfaces: silk, lacquered boards, even polished leaves. One scholar dips a brush into colored ink, producing red, green, and gold strokes on black silk. The effect is startling, almost like a miniature fireworks display captured in lines. Fringe historians speculate that these experiments were attempts to combine visual art and poetry, though purists likely frowned at such extravagance. You notice the rhythm of the courtyard, the soft scratch of brushes, the faint exhale of concentration, occasional bursts of laughter. Patrons pass quietly, pausing to admire each work, sometimes pointing and whispering interpretations. One particularly intricate piece depicts a crane mid-flight, but the tail feathers curl in a way that suggests movement beyond the paper. You marvel, thinking, only in Tang China could paper seem alive. Some calligraphy is functional: letters of introduction, memorials, official notices. Other works are purely expressive, experimental, or designed to impress potential patrons. The Tang obsession with literacy and aesthetics means that even a casual passerby might be judged for their handwriting, their understanding of poetry, or their ability to read subtle references in brushwork. A lively debate erupts among scholars about the merits of cursive versus standard script. One older gentleman insists that cursive captures the soul. A younger poet argues that clarity trumps flourish. Voices rise and fall, punctuated by strokes of the brush. You watch, fascinated, as these debates blend pedagogy, ego, and amusement into one living tapestry of culture. Historians still argue whether Tang debates over script style had real consequences on society or were mostly intellectual sport, but the energy tonight suggests both. You pause to examine a small scroll of a humorous poem rendered in intentionally exaggerated strokes, making the words themselves seem to dance. The crowd chuckles, acknowledging both wit and artistic skill. You realize calligraphy, like so many Tang pastimes, isn't simply about mastery, it's about expression, performance, and a shared delight in the unexpected. By midnight, lanterns flicker low, and the last brush strokes are laid to rest. Scholars bow, the apprentices tidy their supplies, and you step back into the cool night, ink-scented air still clinging faintly to your fingers. You've witnessed elegance, humor, experimentation, and devotion, all woven together with the simple medium of brush and ink. And as you walk toward quieter streets, you feel a deep satisfaction. Calligraphy may not leave bruises or make lantern riddles glow, but in its own precise, subtle way, it shapes both the world and those who dare to touch its ink. The ink scent lingers faintly as you leave the calligraphy courtyard, replaced by the warm aroma of roasting meats and caramelized sugar. You've wandered into a bustling festival market, alive with stalls, acrobats, and merchants shouting prices in rhythmic cadences. Tang markets weren't just places to shop, they were theatrical stages where food, commerce, and entertainment collided in one sensory overload. Lanterns swing overhead, casting dappled light on polished ceramic bowls brimming with noodles and steamed buns. A woman flips skewers of lamb over an open fire, smoke curling toward your nose, carrying a spice punch that makes your stomach rumble. Mainstream historical fact: Chang'an markets during the Tang Dynasty were sprawling, cosmopolitan hubs featuring goods from as far away as Persia, India, and Arabia. Spices, textiles, and exotic ingredients mingled with local produce, making the marketplace a sensory tapestry. Here's the quirky twist. Some stalls offered unusual snacks like sugar-glazed scorpions or candied frogs. Patrons nibbled these delicacies with a mix of thrill and horror, because apparently edible danger was a selling point. Historians still argue whether these were widely consumed treats or mostly showpieces meant to impress curious travelers, but the accounts suggest at least a few adventurous souls dared to taste. You pass a candy stall where a vendor spins molten sugar into intricate shapes, dragons, flowers, even tiny camels. Children gaze in awe, pointing at their favorites. The vendor hums a tune as his hands move at lightning speed, and you realize watching this is almost as delightful as tasting the sugar itself. Tang Street confectioners were master illusionists, turning everyday ingredients into ephemeral art, music threads through the market. A group of performers plays bamboo flutes and small drums, accompanying a troupe of acrobats who tumble and twist with breathtaking precision. You duck as one somersaulting performer nearly collides with a vendor, only for both to laugh and continue their acts seamlessly. These festivals aren't strictly organized, they thrive on spontaneity, improvisation, and a kind of controlled chaos that seems exhilarating rather than dangerous. Children dart between stalls, waving paper lanterns on sticks. Occasionally, one bumps into a stray animal, a cat, a monkey, even a small goat tethered by a rope. Laughter erupts as the goat topples a basket of chestnuts. In Tang festivals, unpredictability was part of the charm. Fringe historians suggest that animals were deliberately included for entertainment, though occasionally they seem to have provided chaos by accident. You approach a stall dedicated to lacquered toys, spinning tops, tiny carved soldiers, and miniature instruments. A boy demonstrates a set of dolls that can balance and bow. Patrons cheer, tossing coins to reward dexterity and innovation. You pause, admiring the ingenuity. Craftsmanship in Tang times wasn't reserved for the elite alone. Skill was celebrated wherever it could astonish or amuse. Nearby, a storyteller begins weaving a tale using exaggerated gestures, changing voices, and shadow puppets on a portable screen. He narrates a story of a clever fox outwitting a greedy magistrate. Children gasp, adults chuckle, and everyone hangs on the tale's twists. Storytelling in Tang markets wasn't just diversion, it was education, moral guidance, and amusement all rolled together. You notice the sensory layering, scent of sugar, sound of drums, sight of vibrant fabrics, touch of warm coins exchanging hands. Every stall competes for attention, and every performer, vendor, or storyteller has their own stage, however small. You start to understand why scholars called Chang'an a city alive with sensation at a tea stall. You sip a steaming brew infused with chrysanthemums. The warmth spreads through you, and you watch as patrons test their reflexes with quick hand games, tossing small coins or discs to see who is fastest. These miniature contests echo the larger drinking games and board games you've seen, reinforcing that Tang Pastimes loved skill, luck, and spectacle equally. The night stretches on. Lanterns reflect off polished bowls, performers take final bows, and the last smoke from grilled meats curls lazily upward. Even as the festival slows, the marketplace remains alive with stories, laughter, and the occasional sigh from someone who spent too many coins chasing sugar or curiosity. You step out, stomach full, senses exhausted but thrilled. Festivals like these, with their bizarre treats, juggling merchants, and miniature spectacles, reveal the Tang appetite for wonder and indulgence. And as you drift toward quieter streets, you sense that, in this world, life itself is just another performance, waiting for someone bold or hungry enough to participate. The distant lantern glow fades behind you, replaced by the quiet rhythm of horse hooves clattering against cobblestones. Night has deepened, and the city feels almost contemplative after the festival's chaos. Yet your journey through Tang Pastimes isn't over. You turn a corner and discover a small courtyard alive with flickering shadows and the soft twang of strings. Tang Dynasty chess xiangqi is about to reveal its peculiar charm. Two players sit opposite each other, wooden pieces arranged meticulously on a carved board. Soldiers, cannons, and generals face off in strategic stances, while spectators lean close to read every move. Mainstream historical fact, xiangqi or Chinese chess, was immensely popular during the Tang Dynasty, enjoyed by both scholars and commoners. It was more than a pastime. It trained strategic thinking, patience, and often, patience tested by opponents who loved psychological games. The quirky tidbit, some players carved their pieces into fantastical creatures rather than the standard characters. Dragons, phoenixes, and even tigers replaced traditional soldiers, making the game feel like a miniature battlefield of imagination. Historians still argue whether such whimsical boards were widespread or the eccentric indulgence of wealthy patrons, but they add a playful layer to a serious strategy game. You crouch beside a young boy who explains the rules animatedly, moving his dragon piece forward like it's charging an enemy fortress. The older gentleman across the board raises an eyebrow, but his fingers betray slight tremors. He's been outmaneuvered twice in a row. This is more than fun. Subtle victories are bragging rights, and losing gracefully requires tact and humility. Around the courtyard, groups of children play simplified versions on the dirt, marking grids with sticks. Parents watch, occasionally chiming in with advice, a mix of amusement and genuine instruction. Even Tang emperors reportedly engaged with xiangqi, though likely with fewer jokes about stolen generals or accidental sacrificial pawns. A woman in a high-collared silk robe sets up a board nearby, explaining that she prefers creative openings that confuse traditionalists. Her opponent, an older man with a neatly trimmed beard, shakes his head with mock indignation. The game becomes a delicate dance of ingenuity and etiquette. You watch, fascinated, as the tension builds with each move like a quiet drama unfolding in miniature. Fringe historians note an unusual pastime sometimes paired with chess. Drinking rules tied to moves. For example, losing a piece might require a sip of wine, while checkmate demanded the victor pour a cup for the vanquished. It sounds chaotic, but it reflects Tang society's blending of skill, risk, and social interaction. The night deepens further. A soft breeze stirs fallen leaves across the courtyard, and lanterns cast their glow on the players' concentrated faces. Children's laughter fades, replaced by the quiet murmurs of strategists debating moves aloud. You sense an almost meditative energy each placement, each calculation, a tiny reflection of life's balance, chance, and cunning. You glance at a particularly ornate board, its pieces inlaid with jade and ivory. Someone quips that losing on this board is like being executed in miniature. Laughter ripples through the small gathering. Because humor, after all, softens even the most serious game. By the time you step away, the chessboards are being packed, pieces tucked into silk pouches. Spectators drift home, quietly discussing clever moves or near victories. You feel the lingering thrill of strategy, camaraderie, and the subtle artistry that Tang chess offers. Even without dice, dragons, or floating wine cups, this pastime proves that the Tang love of skill, patience, and shared amusement permeates every corner of life. And as you leave, the night air feels charged with invisible games and unspoken strategies, a reminder that Tang civilization thrived not only on spectacle and indulgence, but also on thoughtful play and mental agility. The distant lantern glow fades behind you, replaced by the quiet rhythm of horse hooves clattering against cobblestones. Night has deepened, and the city feels almost contemplative after the festival's chaos. Yet your journey through Tang pastimes isn't over. You turn a corner and discover a small courtyard alive with flickering shadows and the soft twang of strings. Tang Dynasty chess **xiangqi** is about to reveal its peculiar charm. Two players sit opposite each other, wooden pieces arranged meticulously on a carved board. Soldiers, cannons, and generals face off in strategic stances, while spectators lean close to read every move. Mainstream historical fact, **xiangqi** or Chinese chess, was immensely popular during the Tang Dynasty, enjoyed by both scholars and commoners. It was more than a pastime. It trained strategic thinking, patience, and often, patience tested by opponents who loved psychological games. The quirky tidbit, some players carved their pieces into fantastical creatures rather than the standard characters. Dragons, phoenixes, and even tigers replaced traditional soldiers, making the game feel like a miniature battlefield of imagination. Historians still argue whether such whimsical boards were widespread or the eccentric indulgence of wealthy patrons, but they add a playful layer to a serious strategy game. You crouch beside a young boy who explains the rules animatedly, moving his dragon piece forward like it's charging an enemy fortress. The older gentleman across the board raises an eyebrow, but his fingers betray slight tremors. He's been outmaneuvered twice in a row. This is more than fun. Subtle victories are bragging rights, and losing gracefully requires tact and humility. Around the courtyard, groups of children play simplified versions on the dirt, marking grids with sticks. Parents watch, occasionally chiming in with advice, a mix of amusement and genuine instruction. Even Tang emperors reportedly engaged with **xiangqi**, though likely with fewer jokes about stolen generals or accidental sacrificial pawns. A woman in a high-collared silk robe sets up a board nearby, explaining that she prefers creative openings that confuse traditionalists. Her opponent, an older man with a neatly trimmed beard, shakes his head with mock indignation. The game becomes a delicate dance of ingenuity and etiquette. You watch, fascinated, as the tension builds with each move like a quiet drama unfolding in miniature. Fringe historians note an unusual pastime sometimes paired with chess, drinking rules tied to moves. For example, losing a piece might require a sip of wine, while checkmate demanded the victor pour a cup for the vanquished. It sounds chaotic, but it reflects Tang society's blending of skill, risk, and social interaction. The night deepens further. A soft breeze stirs fallen leaves across the courtyard, and lanterns cast their glow on the players' concentrated faces. Children's laughter fades, replaced by the quiet murmurs of strategists debating moves aloud. You sense an almost meditative energy each placement, each calculation, a tiny reflection of life's balance, chance, and cunning. You glance at a particularly ornate board, its pieces inlaid with jade and ivory. Someone quips that losing on this board is like being executed in miniature. Laughter ripples through the small gathering. Because humor, after all, softens even the most serious game. By the time you step away, the chessboards are being packed, pieces tucked into silk pouches. Spectators drift home, quietly discussing clever moves or near victories. You feel the lingering thrill of strategy, camaraderie, and the subtle artistry that Tang chess offers. Even without dice, dragons, or floating wine cups, this pastime proves that the Tang love of skill, patience, and shared amusement permeates every corner of life. And as you leave, the night air feels charged with invisible games and unspoken strategies, a reminder that Tang civilization thrived not only on spectacle and indulgence, but also on thoughtful play and mental agility. Word count, 1082, greater than awaiting. Continue, ### section, 14, you wander away from the chess courtyard, the soft click of pieces fading behind you, and find yourself in a quieter neighborhood where the scent of ink, incense, and roasted grains lingers faintly in the cool night air. Here, Tang pastimes shift once again toward contemplative recreation. Lantern riddles or **** light the way, and you quickly realize this is a pastime that blends intellect, imagination, and social amusement in equal measure. Lanterns hang from bamboo poles, their paper surfaces painted with intricate designs, dragons, cranes, and swirling calligraphy. Each lantern bears a riddle written delicately across its glowing body. Mainstream historical fact: Tang Dynasty lantern festivals often included riddles as central entertainment. Solving these riddles required literacy, wit, and creativity. They were as much mental exercise as they were festive fun, sometimes spanning days during major holidays. But here's the quirky twist. Some riddles were deliberately absurd or pun-laden, forcing participants to think sideways. One lantern asks, "What walks on 4 in the morning, 2 at noon, and 3 at night?" Yes, you've heard the riddle, but it was definitely circulating in Tang households. Scholars still argue whether the riddles were meant for pure amusement or subtly embedded moral lessons, but either way, crowds gathered eagerly to test their wits. You meander through the crowd, observing small groups leaning close to lanterns, whispering possibilities. A child shouts an answer, only to be playfully scolded by an elder for overconfidence. Laughter bubbles through the night, punctuated by soft claps when someone cracks a particularly tricky puzzle. Lantern riddles are both competitive and cooperative. Bragging rights matter, but everyone enjoys seeing others puzzle through the challenge. Nearby, a scholar jots answers on a small slate, clearly enjoying both the process and the opportunity to display erudition. Another guest leans against a tree, mumbling to himself, trying to unravel a pun that involves homophones, the shape of a fish, and a reference to a well-known poem. The complexity is dizzying, yet oddly satisfying when the answer clicks. Fringe historians note that some Tang riddles involved cross-disciplinary knowledge, mathematics, astronomy, poetry, and folklore all intermingled. One lantern reportedly asked about the exact number of steps in a palace stairwell, requiring both observation and memorization. You can't help but admire the mental dexterity required to thrive at these games. A young couple whispers over a lantern, their faces lit by its soft glow. They work together, balancing logic and intuition, occasionally leaning close enough for warmth. You notice that, like many Tang pastimes, lantern riddles are social as well as intellectual, encouraging partnerships, debate, and gentle competition. One particularly elaborate lantern depicts a dragon curling around clouds, its riddle embedded in a tiny scroll attached to a claw. Solving it earns a small prize-painted fan or a sweet treat. Patrons cheer, teasing each other for near misses or brilliant deductions. You watch a man triumphantly hold up a solved riddle. His victory is met with polite applause and the playful groans of rivals. The crowd is eclectic. Children, scholars, merchants, and noblemen mingle seamlessly. Lantern riddles bridge social divides, allowing participants from different backgrounds to engage in the same mental challenge. You realize that in Tang society, amusement and education were rarely separate. Fun was an opportunity to display intelligence, cultural knowledge, and wit. By midnight, lanterns sway gently in the breeze, the glow softening. Some riddles remain unsolved, teasing passers-by even as they drift home. You walk slowly among the fading light, carrying the quiet thrill of solved puzzles, the echo of laughter, and the gentle tug of human curiosity. And as you leave, you recognize something essential about Tang pastimes. Whether floating cups of wine, exotic animals, intricate board games, or glowing lanterns, life is an ever-shifting stage. Each activity reveals a balance of skill, ingenuity, and delight, a culture that thrived on both spectacle and subtlety.
The lantern-lit streets gradually dissolve into shadows as you leave the riddles behind, and a gentle hush falls over the city. Yet your journey through Tang pastimes is not complete. You've one final world to enter, a private, refined space where the most subtle pleasures of the dynasty unfold. You find yourself in a scholar's garden, tucked away behind high walls, where fragrance, reflection, and quiet amusement intertwine. Fragrant blossoms perfume the air, jasmine, magnolia, and early lotus petals, carrying a delicate sweetness that mingles with the faint dampness of carefully watered paths. A koi pond reflects the crescent moon, and you hear the soft splash of a fish nudging the water. Mainstream historical fact: Tang scholars cultivated private gardens not merely for beauty, but as spaces for meditation, literary discussion, and artistic expression. These gardens were carefully designed to evoke natural landscapes in miniature, merging rocks, water, plants, and architecture. The quirky element: some gardens included hidden mechanism stones that triggered small waterspouts, pavilions with secret wind chimes, or miniature bridges that creaked in amusing ways when crossed. Patrons delighted in subtle surprises that made even quiet contemplation a small adventure. Historians still argue whether these whimsical features were widespread or the eccentric indulgence of particularly playful literati, but the effect is undeniable. You wander along a winding path, the gravel crunching softly underfoot. A scholar sits beneath a pavilion, reading aloud a poem, while another sketches the landscape with ink. The performance is intimate. Words and images echo softly across the water. The air feels charged with subtle creativity, yet the pace is deliberate and calming. Nearby, a tea ceremony unfolds with meticulous precision. Hot water streams into delicate porcelain cups, fragrant leaves unfurling to release their essence. You notice the host's small gestures, how they turn the teapot, the way they hold the cup, the silent pauses between movements. These rituals aren't merely functional. They are aesthetic exercises, blending mindfulness, etiquette, and sensory pleasure. Fringe historians note that such ceremonies often included playful tricks. A cup might be slightly unbalanced, prompting guests to react carefully, or a sweet addition might surprise the palate, eliciting laughter alongside reverence. Small gatherings in the garden involve games of wit and poetry. Guests compose impromptu verses inspired by flowers, moonlight, or the ripple of water. Laughter and applause mix with the sigh of wind through bamboo. You realize that, in Tang's culture, the boundary between amusement and intellectual engagement is nearly invisible. Cleverness is always entertainment, and play is always a lesson in refinement. The pond itself offers quiet diversion. Floating paper boats, sometimes with tiny lanterns, glide across the water's surface. A scholar bets another that their boat will reach the far side first. You watch entranced as the two push gently with delicate sticks, the soft glow reflecting in the water. This might seem trivial, but it mirrors the larger Tang philosophy: careful observation. Patience and subtle competition were endlessly satisfying. The garden also hosts musical interludes. A guqin player strums notes so delicate they barely disturb the night air. Occasionally, a bird reel, not imitated, joins in with a trill, and the sound mingles seamlessly with the human melody. You sense the Tang ideal, harmony between man, nature, and artistry, where even a single note is a source of quiet pleasure. By now, you feel the night stretching its calm embrace. Each element, water, stone, wind, song, scent is part of a delicate choreography. Even the whimsical touches, like a hidden stone that spouts water when stepped upon, remind you that delight often lives in the small, unexpected moments. As you prepare to leave, the scholar bows slightly, a silent invitation to return, to observe, and to participate in this delicate dance of senses. You step back into the streets, the distant glow of lanterns fading behind you, and reflect. Tang pastimes were not just entertainment, they were an intricate, intertwined philosophy of life, balancing spectacle, intellect, humor, and subtle beauty. The night quiets around you as you walk, the bustling streets replaced by a gentle hush. Moonlight drifts over rooftops, soft and silver, casting long shadows that ripple like slow-moving rivers. Your senses, previously on high alert, now rest easily. Each riddle solved, each cup of wine tasted, each brushstroke observed, and every note of music heard has left a lingering warmth, like embers fading in a hearth. You recall the puppet dragons, the acrobats balancing on chairs, the delicate curves of calligraphy, and the careful placement of silk robes. The memories blend into a tapestry of sensation, laughter, awe, surprise, and quiet contemplation. Even the most frantic pastimes, the dice, the exotic animals. The bustling markets now seem soft-edged, their energy absorbed into a gentle current that carries you onward. With every step, your body feels lighter, your mind quieter. The scent of lotus, the shimmer of silk, the whisper of bamboo leaves all mingle into a calm lullaby, inviting your thoughts to settle. You can feel your heartbeat slowing, each pulse a gentle reminder that even the wildest temp's adventures eventually give way to stillness. Think of the Tang Dynasty not as a distant time, but as a living world where people played, laughed, and explored the boundaries of curiosity. Let the sounds of streets, gardens, and courtyards float in your mind like drifting lanterns, lighting your imagination softly without urgency or need for conclusion. Breathe deeply. Let the warmth of the feasts, the thrill of games, the intrigue of riddles, and the serenity of gardens melt together. You are a quiet witness to centuries of human delight, where every peculiar pastime offers a gentle nudge toward wonder, humor, and reflection. And now, as your eyelids grow heavy and the world dims into the hush of night, carry the quiet magic of Temp's pastimes with you into sleep. Let the lanterns float, the koi swim, and the melodies linger just beyond your dreams.
You shake off the wax drips from your sleeve and let the glow of lanterns fade behind you, because now the roar of hooves and the clang of mallets on wooden balls drag you toward the wide-open fields outside the city walls. Polo, that game you might picture with wealthy Brits sipping tea afterward, is very much alive here in Tang China, but with way more chaos and far fewer polite handshakes. The dust rises in clouds as riders thunder past. You can almost taste the grit between your teeth, though maybe that's just the kebab skewer you forgot to finish earlier. Horses snort like they're auditioning for heavy metal vocals, and brightly dressed nobles lean dangerously low from their saddles, swinging long sticks at a leather ball that darts across the ground. Polo in the Tang Dynasty isn't some idle pastime, it's a contact sport, rough, risky, and absolutely adored by the elite. Even emperors joined in, and yes, sometimes fell off their horses in very undignified ways. The mainstream historical fact, Emperor Xuanzang was famously passionate about polo, often hosting matches at court. Nobles considered it a vital skill, not only for fun but also as military training. If you could chase down a ball on horseback, you could probably chase down an enemy on a battlefield too. What better way to disguise military drills than to call them games and make everyone sweat for fun? But here's the quirky twist. Polo sometimes involved donkeys instead of horses. Records mention donkey polo, a less glamorous but much funnier version, often used for casual play or training. Picture grown men bouncing awkwardly on stubborn donkeys while trying to swing mallets. That's Tang humor right there. You stand near the sidelines, surrounded by cheering spectators. Servants wave fans over aristocrats lounging on mats, sipping wine and gossiping about whose horse looks too scrawny. A lady points with her lacquered finger and says, "That rider? Too much drama, not enough skill." Another murmurs about whose robe silk is imported from Persia, because of course sports fashion critiques existed long before modern commentators. One rider suddenly topples, smacking the dust. The crowd gasps, half in sympathy, half in delight. Polo was dangerous, fatal injuries weren't rare. Historians still argue whether Emperor Muzong's early death in the 9th century was accelerated by polo injuries or just bad luck. Either way, you can't help but note no helmet, no pads, and a horse moving faster than your Wi-Fi when it's actually working. Safety clearly wasn't the priority. And yet, the thrill of the game is contagious. You watch as teams strategize, galloping in formation. The mallets swing like windmill arms, clashing against each other midair. Dust coats your sandals, the ball zips past, and suddenly you find yourself half tempted to join. Except you don't ride horses and you value your bones intact, so you wisely remain a spectator. Nearby, musicians strike up a tune with drums and reed pipes to keep the energy high. Kids chase each other with sticks, pretending to play polo themselves, while street vendors shout about melon slices and roasted nuts. The entire event feels like a medieval Super Bowl, minus commercials, but with the same over-the-top hype. Every so often the emperor himself might appear, seated on an elaborate platform with embroidered cushions. When he raises his cup, the crowd erupts in cheers because, let's be honest, nobody wants to be the one person not clapping in front of absolute power. Emperors weren't just fans, they were also players. Xuanzang, for example, was so obsessed with polo that he built special grounds inside the palace. Imagine your boss turning the office parking lot into a soccer field just because they liked the game's same energy. The political side of polo runs deep too. A noble's performance could win imperial favor. If you galloped well, hit hard, and looked heroic doing it, doors opened for you at court. Fumble too much, and your career might look like the trampled grass underfoot. Games weren't just games, they were auditions for status, wrapped in sweaty horsehair. You notice a peculiarity? Some matches feature women players, especially princesses and court ladies. That's right, Tang women sometimes took to the field, their robes shortened for riding, hair bound tight. One famous mural shows female polo players mid-swing, proving this wasn't just a men's pastime. Historians still argue whether these matches were symbolic performances or genuine competitions, but either way, the sight of silk-clad women charging forward on horseback must have turned more than a few heads. As the game reaches its climax, the dust storm thickens and the shouts rise to a crescendo. A rider arcs their mallet, smacks the ball clean, and the crowd erupts. Victory belongs to one team tonight, but tomorrow the horses will line up again. The nobles will don their riding boots, and the bruises will be forgotten beneath another round of applause. You step back from the field, ears still ringing from hooves pounding like thunder. The lantern riddles of last night seem almost tame compared to this raw spectacle. Yet both are tied by the same thread. Tang citizens chasing joy in peculiar, extravagant ways, whether by staring into firelit riddles or by risking their necks in polo dust. And as you brush the grit from your sleeves, you know you'll carry this image with you, nobles in flying silks, emperors leaning forward in suspense, and the unforgettable moment when someone tried to play polo on a donkey and somehow convinced the crowd it was still impressive. The dust of polo still clings to your throat as you duck back inside the city, this time following the steam rising from tiled roofs. The scent hits you first: rosemary, chrysanthemum, mugwort, all steeped in hot water. You've stumbled into the Tang Dynasty's beloved bathhouses, where pleasure, gossip, and a little too much communal nudity blend together into a pastime nobody skipped if they wanted to stay relevant. Inside, the air is thick and damp, carrying the hiss of heated stones and the splash of water poured from ladles. You peel off your imaginary travel robes and slip into a pool that feels like someone hugged you with liquid warmth. The Tang people adored bathing, not just to wash off the dust of horse polo, but as a ritual, a statement, even a little flex of status. Mainstream historians point out that Emperor Xuanzong built elaborate palace baths, and public ones thrived in Chang'an, often decorated with murals of birds and blossoms to make even scrubbing your elbows feel poetic. And of course, you don't just soak, you socialize. Around you, nobles and merchants alike trade stories of business deals, court intrigues, and whose poetry recital bombed last night. The bathhouse is the medieval coffee shop, except everyone is pruny and wearing exactly 0 silk robes. One Tang poem even teases that gossip rises with steam, which feels accurate when you hear 3 women nearby whispering about a minister's new concubine, their laughter echoing off the tiles. Here's the quirky bit. Perfumed baths weren't just about smelling nice. Some recipes included crocodile dung as a cosmetic ingredient, yes, crocodile dung, carefully dried and ground into powder, mixed with herbs. It was believed to soften skin or act as sunscreen. Imagine explaining to your dermatologist that you've been exfoliating with reptile poop. Effective? Historians still argue whether it was legit skincare or just an unfortunate placebo, but hey, it probably kept mosquitoes at bay. The bathhouse attendants are busy too. Young boys in plain cotton carry buckets, while older women sell packets of powdered herbs. One merchant tries to convince you to buy immortality salts, which promise to keep you youthful forever. Judging by his wrinkled hands, the sales pitch is a little weak. Still, people lap up these concoctions because wellness marketing, it turns out, is timeless. You move from the warm pool into a hotter chamber. The steam clings to your lashes, and you sweat instantly. Tang baths often had multiple rooms, tepid pools, scalding pools, even cold plunges that made grown men squeal louder than the flute players outside. The transition is dizzying but invigorating, like a medieval spa day without the cucumber slices. At one corner, masseurs knead shoulders with herbal oils, and you can almost feel the pressure loosening your spine. Tang medical texts recommended massage and bathing to balance qi, that vital energy believed to run through the body. If your qi got clogged, well, maybe you needed more lavender oil or just a nap in warm water. The gossip around you grows juicier. A merchant brags about smuggling in Persian glass, while a scholar recites a half-finished poem about cranes flying at dawn. Nobody claps. Instead, someone suggests he should stick to studying taxes. You smile because even in a room full of steam, the burn is real. Bathhouses were also surprisingly inclusive. Common folk, nobles, men, women separate facilities, yes, but all had access to some version of public baths. For women especially, the bathhouse became a rare space for freedom. where they could relax, swap news, and maybe plot a little matchmaking. Tang society was comparatively open, and bathhouses reflected that looseness of boundaries. But don't think it was all wholesome bonding. Some sources hint that bathhouses doubled as discreet meeting spots for illicit liaisons. Were these romantic encounters common, or were critics just being judgmental? Historians still argue whether the Tang bathhouse was truly a den of sign or simply smelled like one because of the sulfur. Steam curls upward, forming ghostly patterns. You lean back, close your eyes, and feel yourself almost float. The sensory details sharpen, the sharp snap of wet towels, the clink of cups as someone pours tea by the poolside, the faint perfume of sandalwood burning in a censer. For a moment, you forget you're centuries away from home. Then, a sudden splash two kids cannonball into the shallow pool. Their mother scolds them, but you can tell she's barely suppressing a smile. Even in the Tang Dynasty, children turned baths into playgrounds, much to everyone else's annoyance. You dodge the wave, your hair dampened anyway, and laugh quietly to yourself. The longer you sit, the more the chatter reveals the undercurrent of Tang life, who's rising in rank, whose poetry is catching attention, whose household has imported a peacock. In this steamy microcosm, reputation is shaped as much by your skincare routine as by your scholarly merits. And when you finally climb out, skin flushed and fingers wrinkled, you feel not only cleaner but also oddly plugged into the social currents of a world long gone. The bathhouse wasn't just hygiene, it was theater, a networking hub, and yes, occasionally a questionable laboratory for crocodile dung skincare experiments. As you towel off with a scrap of rough hemp cloth, you realize, while the lantern lights glittered and the polo field thundered, the bathhouse is where the Tang Dynasty whispered. And sometimes whispers told you far more than shouts ever could. Your skin still tingles from the herbal oils as you drift out of the bathhouse, only to be pulled by the gentle hum of a zither and the sweet bite of rice wine on the breeze. The night stretches into gardens glowing under the moon, and you realize you've stepped into one of the Tang Dynasty's most cherished rituals, poetry gatherings. Forget karaoke bars or open mic nights, this is the original poetry slam, except the audience might actually execute you socially if you rhyme moon with soon. The garden is arranged like a stage set. Lanterns dangle from peach trees, their shadows flickering across winding stone paths. Scholars, courtiers, and poets sit cross-legged on mats, cups of wine in hand, brushes and inkstones laid neatly beside them. A boy servant carefully pours from a jade jug and you accept a cup. The taste is sharp and warm, trickling down your throat as if daring you to say something clever. You immediately regret not bringing a rhyming dictionary. Mainstream fact: poetry in the Tang Dynasty wasn't a hobby, it was a national obsession. Exams for government posts required poetry composition, meaning your career could hinge on whether you nailed a metaphor about cranes or mangled one about willows. Great poets like Li Bai and Du Fu became cultural celebrities, their verses memorized across the empire. If Li Bai had had Instagram, he would have been posting selfies with mountains and captions like, "Drank wine, wrote poem, might fight the moon later, but here," the quirky twist. Some gatherings included drinking games where poems were composed on the spot while wine cups floated down a winding stream. Known as Ku Shui Liu Xiang or floating cups, the game forced you to recite before the cup reached you or drink as punishment. Imagine speed poetry combined with beer pong, only with better vocabulary and fancier robes. You watch now as a lacquered cup drifts toward you, bobbing on the water. The crowd waits, eyes glinting. You panic for a second, then mumble something about moonlight on bathhouse steam and whispers lost in the dust of hooves. The room erupts not in mockery, but in polite applause. You've survived. Barely. A young woman steps forward next, her robe sleeves brushing the ground like silk waves. Her voice is soft yet commanding as she composes a verse about the chrysanthemums blooming despite autumn's chill. The audience nods, impressed. Tang women weren't excluded from these gatherings. Some became renowned poets in their own right. Historians still argue whether women's contributions were as widely celebrated as men's or simply preserved by luck, but the surviving works show a sharp wit that could easily duel with any man's brush. The wine keeps flowing, and soon the poetry gets bolder. Someone writes a verse comparing the emperor's polo team to ducks waddling in mud, scandalous, risky, and hilarious enough to earn nervous giggles. Another scrawls drunkenly about a lost sandal in the bathhouse, somehow turning it into a metaphor for mortality. It's absurd, but also strangely moving. The sounds of the garden fold into the performance, cicadas buzzing like a natural percussion section, a bamboo flute adding melancholy undertones, the occasional hiccup of an over-enthusiastic drinker. Ink splatters, brushes scratch, and paper rustles. You feel as though the air itself is pregnant with words, waiting for someone bold enough to catch them. One man, clearly tipsy, insists he can outdo Li by himself. He stands, recites half a line, forgets the rest, then bows as if he's gifted the world enlightenment. The crowd roars with laughter. Tang poets were revered, but they were also teased. Fame didn't protect you from being the butt of a joke. If anything, it guaranteed it. The scholarly debate bubbles again. Some argue these poetry nights were refined cultural salons, while others suggest they often devolved into drunken chaos. Judging by the way a servant just tripped into the koi pond, sending carp scattering like fireworks, you're leaning toward the chaos theory. And yet, there's a serenity in it too. You sip another mouthful of wine and feel your head swim slightly. A poet near you scribbles furiously, dipping his brush with precision as though the moon itself demanded his attention. Another leans back, staring upward, murmuring lines no one else can hear. For them, poetry isn't just entertainment. It's a lifeline, a way to wrestle with existence itself under the watchful stars. The night wears on and the verses stack like bricks of memory. Some will be forgotten by dawn, others copied and passed along for centuries. You, meanwhile, find yourself humming softly, your fingers itching to scrawl something, even if your handwriting looks like drunken ants. By the time the moon tilts westward, the gathering grows quiet. A few poets are asleep on their mats, brushes still clutched in their hands. The stream gurgles gently, the last floating cup spinning in lazy circles. You realize you've just witnessed what may be the Tang Dynasty's purest joy, words given shape in the night air, carried forward on breath and ink, lingering long after the laughter fades. And as you step out of the garden, the cool air brushing your cheeks, you think back to your clumsy poem about bathhouse steam. Maybe it wasn't brilliant. Maybe it won't survive 1,000 years. But for tonight it was enough to join the chorus, and that like moonlight on water feels strangely eternal. The garden's hush drifts away behind you, and soon you're swept back into the bustling arteries of Chang'an, where refinement is traded for ruckus. The poetry crowd might sneer at low entertainment, but here in the streets, the common folk and plenty of curious nobles in disguise have their own stages, puppet theaters and jugglers performing under strings of lanterns where applause comes in the form of tossed coins and belly laughs. A wooden platform creaks beneath the weight of a painted puppet theater. Its backdrop shows mountains and rivers in crude but colorful brushstrokes, and a flickering lamp casts uneven shadows across the curtain. Suddenly a carved figure lurches into view, a general with exaggerated eyebrows and a sword almost as big as his torso. The puppeteer's voice growls through the thin screen, joined by the squeak of reed pipes and the sharp clang of a cymbal. The crowd roars. You realize this isn't refined storytelling, it's pure slapstick, Tang style. The mainstream historical fact, puppet theaters, especially shadow plays, were recorded in Tang times as popular entertainment at markets and festivals. Travelers from Central Asia even remarked on China's knack for bringing flat puppets to life with fire and screen, long before cinema existed. These shows carried heroic epics, Buddhist parables, and even cheeky satire that made audiences laugh until rice wine shot out their noses. But here's the quirky tidbit. Some puppet shows were deliberately grotesque, featuring puppets with detachable heads or comically long tongues. Children squealed in half delight, half terror, while adults clapped at the absurdity. Imagine Sesame Street, but Elmo's head pops off every 5 minutes, and somehow it's still family-friendly. The street swells with energy. Jugglers toss knives into the air, their blades glinting against lamplight, and one man catches a spinning bowl on his forehead, bowing theatrically. Nearby, an acrobat stacks chairs 3 high, climbs them with the grace of a cat, then flips down to thunderous applause. The audience gasps as much in fear as in admiration. There's no safety net, just confidence and maybe one too many cups of courage. Coins clink onto mats laid before each performer, a medieval version of the tip jar. Children beg their parents for coppers to throw, not because they care about artistry, but because tossing coins is its own entertainment. Some unlucky jugglers dodge coins that miss the mat and hit them square in the shin, occupational hazard. You pause to savor the sensory chaos. Spices mingle with the sharp tang of oil lamps. Drums pound out rhythms, syncing with your pulse. The crowd's laughter rises like a tide, cresting with every pratfall or puppet twist. You bump shoulders with strangers, all of you drawn into the shared spell of street theater. One puppeteer starts a parody skit involving a crooked official who accidentally misplaces tax money. The audience howls because everyone recognizes the type, even if no names are spoken. Historians still argue whether these satires genuinely critiqued politics or were just playful mockery, but either way, the laughter carries a hint of rebellion. You catch sight of a foreign performer, perhaps from Sardia or Persia, spinning flaming torches in dizzying arcs. The Silk Road made Chang'an a crossroads of cultures, and entertainment absorbed it all. Music, costumes, tricks, everything borrowed, remixed, and performed for a crowd that didn't care where it came from as long as it dazzled. Then the donkey arrives. Yes, a donkey painted with swirls of blue and red, dragging a tiny cart that serves as a mobile stage. Out hops a troupe of dwarfs, their costumes exaggerated, their humor loud and bawdy. They act out comic skits, poking fun at pompous nobles and bumbling scholars. The donkey brays at the punchline, perfectly on cue. The crowd nearly collapses with laughter. You notice, though, that behind the laughter there's also a whiff of attention. Performers depend on audience generosity, and some nights are lean. A juggler might go home with a pocket full of coppers, or just an empty belly and sore feet. Entertainment was precarious, living on the edge of applause and hunger. Still, in this moment, joy outweighs worry. Children wave paper pinwheels, lovers lean against each other, and old men stroke their beards, chuckling at the antics on stage. You realize these street corners are as essential to the Tang spirit as the emperor's polo grounds or the poetess' moonlit gardens. Here, life is raw, noisy, and immediate. The show closes with a flourish. A puppet dragon, its body made of linked silk segments, snakes across the screen, belching smoke from hidden incense. The crowd erupts one last time, tossing coins until they scatter like rain. The puppeteer bows low, his shadow long against the lamp glow, before packing away his magical creatures into plain wooden boxes. Tomorrow, he'll unpack them again, and the cycle of laughter and wonder will continue. As you step away, the echoes of cymbals still ringing in your ears, you can't help but smile. You've seen poetry sung to the stars, and now you've watched puppets crack jokes in a dusty market. Both are performances, both are art, and both remind you that the Tang Dynasty's peculiar pastimes weren't just about elegance, they were also about letting loose, laughing loud and tossing coins at someone who made you forget for a moment the weight of everyday life. The echo of cymbals fades, replaced by the rustle of feathers and the occasional exotic screech that sounds suspiciously like a child throwing a tantrum. You've drifted into a district where entertainment takes a stranger form, private households and noble estates showing off their menageries of rare and bewildering animals. If the poetry gatherings were about wit and the street theaters about laughter, this pastime is pure spectacle. Look at what I've got, and please, try not to get bitten. The courtyard you enter smells faintly of hay, spiced feed, and a little too much dung. A nobleman beams proudly as he parades his peacock across the tiled floor. Its tail spreads in a shimmering fan, each feather catching the lamplight like shards of emerald and sapphire. Children gasp, pointing. Adults nod appreciatively, though you suspect half the admiration is forced politeness. Owning a peacock in the Tang Dynasty is the equivalent of having a sports car, flashy, expensive, and a little impractical. Mainstream fact: Tang elites adored exotic animals, many imported via the Silk Road. Records mention lions, leopards, ostriches, and even rhinoceroses gifted as tribute to emperors. These creatures weren't just pets. They were political statements, proof of the dynasty's vast reach and influence. The bigger and weirder your animal, the more powerful you appeared. But here's the quirky tidbit. Some families kept pet monkeys trained to serve wine or entertain guests with clumsy acrobatics. Imagine sitting at a banquet and being served by a sulky macaque in a tiny vest. Funny? Yes. Hygienic? Absolutely not. Historians still argue whether these stories are exaggerated or if Tang households truly risked fleas for flair, but the anecdotes persist. You watch as a handler leads out a camel, its long lashes batting lazily, chewing with complete disinterest in the crowd. Camels were prized symbols of trade-living proof that your household had connections stretching deep into Central Asia. Of course, they also spat when annoyed, which made standing too close a gamble. Sure enough, one unfortunate scholar takes a wet hit to the sleeve and the laughter ripples like wildfire. Then, a pair of cranes glide into the courtyard, their slender necks bobbing elegantly. These weren't exotic imports but homegrown symbols of longevity and grace. Nobles loved keeping them in garden ponds, letting their reflections mingle with lotus blossoms. One poet wrote that a crane's shadow at dusk lifts the heart higher than any song, which is poetic until you realize cranes also shriek like squeaky gates. Romantic image slightly shattered. The strangest sight tonight? A dancing bear? Its handler tugs a rope, and the bear sways awkwardly on hind legs to the beat of a drum. Children clap wildly, though the bear's expression suggests it would rather be anywhere else. Animal welfare wasn't exactly a Tang priority, but spectacle was. The bear sways, the drum pounds, and the nobles nod in approval. You, meanwhile, shuffle back slowly, not trusting the rope one bit. Historians still argue whether the Tang obsession with exotic animals was about genuine fascination or pure status signaling. Did they really care about these creatures, or were they living trophies, as disposable as gold cups and silk robes? The debate continues, but tonight the animals look less like cherished companions and more like living emojis of wealth. One fringe story you overhear makes you chuckle, a tale of a minister who supposedly kept a tiger in his backyard to scare off nosy neighbors. Logical? Maybe not. Effective? Probably. You imagine the minister peeking through his window, smugly sipping tea as visitors flee at the first growl. Neighborhood watch, Tang style. The courtyard grows rowdier as servants bring out trays of fruit pomegranates split open like jeweled hearts, persimmons sticky and sweet. Guests gossip not just about the animals, but about who has the newest, rarest creature. Did you hear? The Zhang family imported an ostrich. Its eggs are bigger than a child's head. One whispers. You wonder how many of these claims are true and how many are wine-soaked exaggerations? But either way, the competition is fierce. Some animals were sacred, woven into folklore. Tortoises symbolized stability and were sometimes kept in temple ponds. Deer, with their gentle eyes, were believed to attract immortality luck. You find yourself stroking the shell of a sluggish tortoise, its eyes half shut, utterly unimpressed by human obsession with symbolism. The noise grows when someone leads out a leopard on a chain. The crowd gasps, a thrill of fear and awe. The leopard's coat gleams under the lanterns, its tail twitching with irritation. The handler insists it's tame. The leopard's eyes say otherwise. You take a careful step back, suddenly nostalgic for the puppet dragon that only belched incense smoke. By the end of the evening, your senses are overwhelmed, not by poetry or music, but by feathers, fur, and the pungent smell of hay. Nobles beam with pride, their menageries proof of their reach across continents, their ability to command tribute from lands you've only heard whispered about. As you slip out into the quieter night streets, you can't help but shake your head. Lantern riddles, polo bruises, steamy gossip, puppet dragons, and now peacocks strutting like celebrities. It seems every corner of Tang life comes with its own stage. And tonight, the stars of the show just happen to have wings, tails, or in one unfortunate case, a very grumpy roar. You leave behind the leopardess golden stare and the camel. Unimpressed chewing, only to stumble into a courtyard echoing with laughter, clinking cups, and the unmistakable groan of someone who just lost a bet. Banquets in the Tang Dynasty weren't complete without music, mountains of food, and, most importantly, drinking games. You find yourself seated at a long lacquered table, wine cups already sliding across its glossy surface, and the rules. Well, they're as unpredictable as the people playing them. A host raises a bronze ewer and pours into your cup. The liquid is warm, strong, and carries that heady sweetness of fermented sorghum. The crowd is buzzing, and you quickly realize you're not here just to drink. You're here to gamble your dignity in games that make truth or dare look like kindergarten recess. Mainstream fact: Tang banquets were notorious for their elaborate drinking games. One popular version, pitch pot, involved tossing arrows into narrow-mouthed jars. Miss your shot? Drink. Another required rolling dice, with elaborate forfeits for losing. Sometimes it meant reciting poetry on the spot. Other times it meant draining your cup while everyone laughed at your lack of skill. Here's the quirky tidbit. Some games introduce deliberately ridiculous penalties. You might be ordered to sing off key, hop around the table like a frog, or balance a spoon on your nose. One Tang record even mentions players forced to wear paper hats shaped like donkey ears until the next round. Humiliation was half the fun. Tonight, the crowd is playing a game called *Ling*, where a commander invents silly commands for everyone to follow. Fail to obey in time? Drink. The current commander barks. Scratch your head like a monkey. The whole room erupts into synchronized scratching. One man is too slow, and everyone gleefully chants, "Drink, drink, drink!" His groan is drowned in laughter as he downs his cup. Historians still argue whether these games were lighthearted bonding or thinly disguised tests of wit and stamina. Some suggest they acted as informal auditions for courtly life. Could you keep your cool, stay clever, and outdrink your rivals? Others argue they were simply excuses to get hammered while pretending it was intellectual. Judging by the hiccuping scholar beside you, the second explanation feels more accurate. The noise is intoxicating. Flutes trill between bursts of laughter, and dancers in gauzy robes whirl through the room, their sleeves like ribbons trailing in the air. The smell of roasted lamb, sticky rice cakes, and ginger sauce mixes with the sharp tang of wine. Your cheeks flush, not just from the drink, but from the infectious giddiness of the crowd. Suddenly, your turn comes in *2*. You grip the wooden arrow, squint at the jar across the room, and throw. It arcs beautifully before clattering far off to the side. The crowd howls. A servant already refills your cup. You down it, the liquid burning but oddly invigorating. The laughter feels less like mockery, more like initiation. You're part of the game now. Another round begins. A noblewoman rolls dice, and the table erupts as she gets the drunken poet result, her penalty. Compose 2 lines of verse about the wine itself. Without missing a beat, she writes, "The cup is shallow, yet the night is deep. The wine is strong, yet weaker than my laugh. The applause is deafening." You silently promise never to challenge her in a poetry duel. In the corner, a group invents dares of their own. One man must stand on one foot while reciting a Confucian classic. He topples before finishing the second line, earning another chorus of "Drink, drink." Another guest has to confess his most embarrassing youthful blunder. He admits to accidentally feeding his father's favorite parrot hot peppers, causing it to scream insults for days. The table collapses into giggles. The rules blur as the cup's empty. Some players pretend to argue about philosophy only to dissolve into hiccups. Others sing loudly off-key. At one point, someone produces a lute and strums a ridiculous tune about a donkey trying to join a poetry contest. By now, even the servants are hiding smiles behind their sleeves. You pause to consider the strange balance at play. Drinking games here aren't just diversions, they create bonds. Nobles, scholars, even visiting merchants share in the same embarrassment, the same laughter. Status temporarily dissolves when everyone is equally tipsy and equally ridiculous. And yet, a sharp wit or clever performance could still elevate your reputation. By midnight, the banquet hall is a jumble of toppled mats, scattered dice, and guests sprawled like fallen dominoes. A man snores loudly with a chopstick still in his hand. Another insists he can still play *2*, only to toss his arrow straight into a bowl of duck stew. The commander declares it a perfect shot and commands everyone else to drink. Nobody argues. The night ends not with dignity but with joy. You stumble outside, the cool air clearing your head slightly. Behind you, the laughter still echoes, punctuated by the clink of yet another cup. You realize that while Tang polo fields bruised bodies and poetry gardens elevated souls, drinking games bruised egos and elevated spirits. And in their own peculiar, messy way, they were just as essential to Tang life.
Your head still swims faintly from all that rice wine, but the clatter of dice on wood and the rhythmic scrape of tokens across carved boards draw you onward. You've stepped into the smoky corners of Tang taverns, where games of chance and strategy whirl together in a haze of laughter, curses, and the occasional accusation of cheating. Forget Xbox or Vegas casinos. This is where Tang citizens tested their wits, wallets, and occasionally their friendships. A group gathers around a rectangular board marked with winding paths. Smooth ivory pieces slide across the surface as players argue over moves. This is Asterisk, Liu Bu Asterisk, an ancient Chinese board game that by the Tang era was fading but still clung to life in some circles. Nobody today fully understands its rules. Historians still argue whether it was a game of pure chance or a mix of dice and strategy. But here the players lean forward, brows furrowed, as if the fate of empires rides on their next throw. Nearby, another table crackles with energy as dice tumble from bamboo cups. They bounce, spin, and clatter to a halt, the crowd leaning in to read the results. Bets are shouted, coins slide back and forth, and the losers groan while winners puff up like roosters. Mainstream fact: Temps China had a thriving gambling culture, so much so that officials regularly tried and failed to ban it. Records complain about people losing fortunes overnight, pawnshops swelling with confiscated robes and jewelry the morning after. But here's the quirky tidbit. Some Tang folks gambled with rather unusual stakes. Instead of coins, they sometimes wagered personal possessions, a comb, a scarf, even a poem. Imagine betting your latest haiku on a dice roll and realizing you now owe your drinking buddy not just money but also your most embarrassing verse. The air in the tavern is thick. Oil lamps flicker against smoke from braziers, casting shadows that twitch like restless spirits. You smell fried dumplings, peppercorns, and a faint tang of spilled wine soaking into the floorboards. Voices rise and fall in waves. A triumphant shout at one table, a muttered curse at another, laughter rippling across the room when someone clearly tries and fails to palm an extra die. One group plays asterisk SHUANG, Lu asterisk, a proto-dominoes game with black and white tiles that click satisfyingly as they're slapped onto the table. The players are dead serious, though eyes sharp as hawks. You watch as a scholar slams down his tile with a flourish, grinning. The man opposite him groans, realizing his purse is about to get lighter. Gambling isn't polite pastime here, it's blood sport, wallet edition. Historians still argue whether gambling dens were tolerated as necessary social release or condemned as corrosive vice. Some Temps edicts rail against them, claiming they ruined families. Others suggest officials secretly gambled themselves, their disapproval more about controlling profit than morality. Judging by the bustling tavern before you, prohibition didn't work any better then than it does now. Suddenly, the crowd erupts at the dice table. A merchant in embroidered robes has just rolled an impossible streak, scooping up a small mountain of coins. His face glows with triumph until someone mutters too loudly that the dice are weighted. Suspicion flares, voices rise, and for a moment you think the scene might dissolve into fists and overturn tables. But then the hostile man, with a grin too sharp for comfort, steps in, smoothing tempers with promises of free dumplings. Crisis averted. For now. In a corner, a quieter group plays a storytelling game tied to dice rolls. Each number corresponds to a theme: moon, wine, love, loss, a bird, a flower. Players must improvise lines of verse using their roll. You watch as one unlucky man keeps rolling bird and ends up composing a tragic saga about a pigeon who never gets invited to poetry nights. The table roars with laughter, and you can't help but chuckle along. The sensory tide keeps rolling. Coins clink, dice rattle, tiles slap, and now and then a lute strums in the background. A woman in red silk moves among the tables, serving wine with the kind of smile that dares you to bet just one more round. You take a sip, the warmth pooling in your belly, and feel the pull of the dice yourself. Your hand brushes a pair of carved bone dice left on a bench. You roll them absently, and they clatter to a stop. Double sixes. The man beside you whistles low. Lucky, he mutters. You grin, though you wisely pocket no coins. UVA, seen too many losers tonight to trust beginner's luck. The games stretch late into the night. Some winners leave grinning, purses heavy, others stumble home empty-handed, clutching nothing but regret. And yet, tomorrow they'll be back, because the thrill of rolling dice and the dream of fortune are stronger than caution. As you step back into the night, the din of the tavern still buzzing in your ears, you realize this too is part of Tang life's peculiar charm. Lantern riddles teased the mind, polo tested the body. Poetry revealed the soul, but board games and dice revealed something raw, the temp's hunger for risk, laughter, and the sweet rush of chance.
And the clatter of dice fades behind you, replaced by a string of unfamiliar notes that feel like they've wandered straight from Central Asia. You follow the sound, curious, and find yourself leaning into a courtyard alive with music so strange and magnetic it makes your heartbeat feel like a drum. The Tang Dynasty was a crossroads of the Silk Road, and with trade came instruments, melodies, and musical oddities that could make your ears both delighted and confused. A group of musicians sits under a canopy, their instruments gleaming in lantern light. One strums a Persian lute, its body round and polished, producing soft, intricate notes that ripple through the cool night air. A second musician taps a small drum, while a reed instrument from Central Asia cuts a sharp, almost metallic tone. Mainstream historical fact: Tang China imported countless musical instruments from Persia, India, and beyond, incorporating them into court and street performances. This fusion created sounds that were exotic even to the cosmopolitan residents of Chang'an. But here's the quirky twist. Some performers tune their instruments to mimic animal calls. You catch a lute trying to imitate a bird, and for a moment you're genuinely unsure whether the bird is real or just a skilled musician. Patrons of the arts were delighted, or perhaps slightly disturbed by these sonic experiments. Historians still argue whether these animal imitations were widespread practice or just isolated showy tricks. Either way, it adds a bizarre charm to the evening. You notice a young woman playing a small drum while balancing on one foot. Her hair cascades over her shoulders, nearly brushing the instrument as she taps out rhythms with perfect timing. The crowd watches, mesmerized, as if the drumming itself could summon fortune or applause. Children mimic her motions with tiny clay pots, while older men nod along, trying not to miss a beat. Nearby, a street performer wields a long, curved instrument called a pipa. The strings twang and pluck with a voice almost human in its expressiveness. Patrons lean close to listen, some closing their eyes as if the melody might solve all the world's problems. The pipa wasn't new to China, it arrived centuries earlier, but Tang musicians experimented with rhythms and scales that made it feel thrillingly novel. A curious anecdote floats through the air. One emperor reportedly insisted on hearing a foreign musician play the drum so precisely that he could mimic the heartbeat of a horse. True or embellished, it speaks volumes about the Tang obsession with exotic performance and the blending of cultures. Imagine someone today insisting their drummer replicate a car engine's sound, equally bizarre, equally mesmerizing. You watch a small child attempt the lute, plucking strings haphazardly while the crowd coos. Mistakes are forgiven as long as the spirit is right. Musical skill in Tang times was less about perfection and more about participation and flair. Even the awkward strums add to the texture of the night. The fusion of instruments creates a symphony that's both alien and enchanting. Reeds from Persia, drums from Central Asia, native Chinese zithers, they swirl together like spices in a fragrant stew. Patrons clap and sway, some improvising dances on the spot, creating a living orchestra of humans and instruments combined. Then a more unconventional performance catches your attention. A musician pairs wind chimes with a small bronze gong, striking them in patterns meant to mimic rain. The effect is delicate yet absurd, and you can't help but smile. Fringe historians suggest this might have been a precursor to experimental music, though others argue it was merely an eccentric noble's whim. Either way, it's delightfully weird. A troupe arrives, bringing drums of varying sizes. They strike in precise rhythm, punctuated by metallic clanging and foot stomps. The crowd joins in spontaneously, their claps forming a chorus of participatory music. You notice even the camels from earlier might have tuned in if they could hearing percussion seems like it would confuse them, but the humans are rapt. As the night wears on, the melodies slow, the exotic instruments settling into a gentle hum. Music, like lanterns or poetry, isn't just for amusement in Tang life. It's a bridge connecting people across space, and culture reminding them of distant lands. Strange creatures and distant voices carried along the Silk Road. You take a deep breath, letting the unusual harmonies wash over you. The zither, the lute, the drum, the reed, they create something bigger than sound alone. It's joy, curiosity, and wonder spun together. And you realize that while polo, bathhouses, and poetry shaped Tang lives, it was music that made the world feel unexpectedly wide, exotic, and just a little magical.